It would be easy to play things safe, but I think the New Orleans Saints head coaching search needs a little bit of risk. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at how all the eyes are on the New Orleans Saints head coaching opportunity, of course, but the Saints have another opportunity on their coaching staff to finally improve on the defensive side of the football. We're to also take a look at the Saints salary cap situation, which is way overinvested in aging players to a shocking degree. We know where the New Orleans Saints will begin their salary cap maneuvering this offseason. And to kick everything off, I'm going to tell you why I think this New Orleans Saints head coaching search requires some risk. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode, whether it's your first time or your next time. We thank you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more in the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers put down $5 for their first bet and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started today. The New Orleans Saints have a real opportunity to play it safe at their head coaching hiring spot. Like, they could play it safe here and they could jump at this opportunity now that former Dallas Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy is on the market, and, you know, get some of their process done and then move ahead with Mike McCarthy, who would be a safe and formidable hire for the New Orleans Saints and would give McCarthy his third head coaching stint and his first one since being with Jerry Jones. So it would be a big time sigh of relief for him, I imagine, and all these other things. But I personally believe that the New Orleans Saints head coaching search requires more risk in order to get it right for the long term. I get it that Mike McCarthy has gone and he has won in other places. He's a Super Bowl winning head coach. He's won, double-digit games and seasons. He's taken teams to playoffs. Even though there have been disappointing playoff exits, they have still gotten to the playoffs, which the Saints have not done over the course of the past 4 years. He's put together, 12 different top 10 scoring offenses, 9 different top 5 scoring offenses. He's yet to have a top 5 rushing offense. He's only ever had 3 top 10 rushing offenses in his career. There are concerns and there are good things all about all these different candidates, and Mike McCarthy is included. And one of the great things about Mike McCarthy for New Orleans is that he's a natural fit for what it is that they want, and he's a natural fit for what they tend to gravitate towards, which is a safe decision, right? This is what we've known about the New Orleans Saints for quite some time. They like the veteran over the young guy. They like the one with the NFL experience over the guy that doesn't have as much NFL experience but has better tools and traits, things like that. This is what the Saints have shown over and over again, and it could once again be exactly what they do, but this time at the head coaching position. And honestly, I wouldn't even be mad at them if they did it. I understand from an organizational NFL perspective why you would make that decision. However, with a recent report from Josina Anderson effectively laying out that the Saints are not expecting to allow Mike McCarthy to all of a sudden jump all the work that they've done on other candidates and leap in terms of his candidacy, that's a good sign, because what it's showing is that the Saints are not stepping over themselves trying to revert back to playing it safe. And I think that that is wise by New Orleans, because I do think that taking in a little bit of risk here and going with the first-time head coach could go a long way for this team. Yes, you could land Mike McCarthy and he could get 5 seasons here in New Orleans and give you a couple of winning records and things like that. And maybe you get to the playoffs, maybe you don't. Maybe when you get to the playoffs, you're a first-round exit. And that's the story. But is that going to feel like you've really rejuvenated this program? Is that really going to feel like you've succeeded? Is that really going to make you feel like the New Orleans Saints are back, quote unquote? You'd be hard pressed to convince me that anyone would buy that. That's why I think that this head coaching search needs risk. It's one of the reasons why guys like Aaron Glenn and Joe Brady are still at the very top of the list for me. And again, now I'm talking about my personal head coaching list in terms of who I think should be the New Orleans Saints head coach. Guys like Aaron Glenn and Joe Brady are at the top of that list for me. I'm not as interested in guys that have done it before. Vrabel was maybe the only exception because I was thinking of Vrabel as somebody that comes in, helps you rebuild your culture, is probably gone in 3 years, and then you're taking a better product back to the sales floor. But if you're not going to go that route, and if you're going to look for somebody that can come in now and potentially stick around for the next foreseeable future, then I think a first-time head coach is the way to do it. And I think that while it is a risk because they have not coached in the NFL before, and you got to figure out, are they truly a leader of men? Can they set the example? Are they standard bearers? Can they hold people accountable? All those other things. You got to learn those things in the moment in some cases. I still think that it's well worth that risk to get what would overall be, if it worked out, a better product than the safe move. So that's why, for me, guys like Aaron Glenn and Joe Brady are still very much at the top. Safe and sound is a logical way to go, but I think that a part of hiring a new head coach is kind of trailblazing, right? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to blaze a new trail of success and excitement for your franchise to follow, for your franchise to head down, for your fan base to get excited about. And I don't feel like the safe and sound hire achieves that for you. I think that the risky hire comes with the risk that it doesn't work, but at least you swung, right? At least everyone would say, okay, well, they hired the guy that the fan base really liked. And of course, you're not just going to hire the guy that the fan base really liked, but like they hired somebody that the fan base liked. They hired somebody that ignited the locker room. They hired somebody that ignited the team, and it fell flat. It didn't work, but at least they took a big swing as opposed to going for the safe and sound hire. Now, look, is Mike McCarthy a safe and sound hire? That's the way that I look at it. I said it in yesterday's episode as well, that he's the safe hire, but I don't know if he's the right hire. I'm looking at other guys like Aaron Glenn. I think Aaron Glenn's a safe hire too. I think people are really fixated on what his defense looked like in Detroit without understanding the context of what actually happened in Detroit and what that defense is. And I also don't think that you have to be a great coordinator in order to be a great head coach. In fact, most of the time people spend their time complaining about how head coaches are better coordinators than they were head coaches. So give me the guy that's not the strongest coordinator, that doesn't have the top 20 defense, that doesn't have the top 10 defense, that doesn't have all these other things, but that keeps points on the board and helps his team win and motivates his team. Give me that all day. That's one of the reasons why I like Aaron Glenn as a head coach. Because the one metric that I think his defenses are consistently great at is keeping passing touchdowns off the board for other teams, for opposing teams. Now, we're going to get a good glimpse at what Aaron Glenn's defense looks like up against a mobile quarterback in Jaden Daniels this weekend. And that's going to be a really exciting matchup. I think in a weekend where you're going to see Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, that Jaden Daniels is going to be the name that we're going to be talking about on Monday in NFL circles as the best quarterback performance that weekend. But I don't think that makes Aaron Glenn a bad head coach. Yes, Joe Brady found success with Josh Allen, but I don't think that makes him a bad head coach option. Good. He can maximize talent. Excellent. Something to work with, something to build around. And Aaron Glenn is a fantastic leader, which the New Orleans Saints have not had at their helm until they transitioned over to Darren Rizzi. And then you saw the value of what that leadership looked like. So I think the New Orleans Saints are better off playing with a little bit of risk here than going with what's safe and sound when it comes to their head coaching opportunity. And I think that Aaron Glenn and Joe Brady should still remain atop the list, even if Mike McCarthy eventually becomes a front runner once interviewed. Coming up next, let's take a look at the New Orleans Saints salary cap situation, because they've got a lot of money invested in guys that it shouldn't be invested in. We got that coming up next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, make the NFL playoffs all the more exciting with FanDuel today. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and you'll get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's $300 to keep the action going this weekend. You can get in on some pretty big favorites. The Detroit Lions heavily favored over the Washington Commanders. In fact, that's the biggest spread of the week right now, 9.5 points. You've got the Kansas City Chiefs heavy favorites over the Houston Texans as well. Those are great lines to get in on with your first $5 bet. Then you win that $300 in bonus bets by going to the heavy favorite. And then bang, you end up with everything that you need to get involved with even more over at FanDuel.com today. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints. Look, there's no salary cap figure out there that draws more attention than the New Orleans Saints salary cap figure every offseason. And this year, they have a lot of money overinvested in aging players and a player that's about to retire. And that's not the greatest situation for them, but does show you exactly where things need to start for the New Orleans Saints to get cap compliant again this offseason. So let's take a look at 5 of the biggest cap hits that the New Orleans Saints have. Not all the biggest, but these are 5 of the biggest, and they're all due to players age 32 or older, which is wild. Derek Carr, $51.4 million cap hit. Cameron Jordan, $20.06 million cap hit. Taysom Hill, $17.98 million cap hit. Demario Davis, $12.48 million cap hit. And Tyrann Mathieu, $11.3 million cap hit. And that's leaving some change on the board here. But just for overall rounded, easy numbers, that's a good amount of money. And those are all players age 32 or older. That's $113,305,500 invested in those 5 players that are over that 32-year threshold. That figure then takes another leap to $125 million and more, $125.6 million. When you add in the soon-to-be retired right tackle Ryan Ramczyk, who is 30 years old, but he's about to retire, which means he's about to cost the Saints money and not be on their roster, even though they've already reduced his base salary in preparation for his retirement. So before they reduce his $18 million base salary, that figure was up over $140 million, is what that means. That's where the New Orleans Saints money is currently invested. How much, you wonder? Well, the 2025 salary cap hasn't been expressed yet in terms of exactly what it's going to be, but the expectation is that it's going to be just north of $270 million. I think over the cap has it projected at like $272.5 million. Some have it right at 270, whatever it might be. We'll operate with a $270 million number right now. But that means that of those 5 players, those 6 players, including Ryan Ramczyk, so 5 players 32 or older, and then Ryan Ramczyk, all 6 of those players take up 46.5% of the projected $270-ish million salary cap in 2025. That's nearly half of the salary cap going to those 6 players, one of which is not going to be on the roster in 2025. Now, that number is going to change once Ryan Ramczyk gets designated he won't be designated a post June 1, but what will happen is that they will process his retirement after June 1st on June 2nd, which will then knock that cap hit in half. So instead of him costing the team, 23-ish million dollars, it's going to be about $11 million by the time that it's all said and done. And then another $11 million is going to roll over into the 2026 salary cap. So some of this money is going to move around, but what this shows you is where the Saints need to begin their process of getting under the salary cap, because they need to not only get compliant with the salary cap, i.e. even or just below, but they need to open themselves up some money to be able to improve their roster and improve their team and start building their team in the vision of their head coach, rebuilding or retooling or whatever it is that NFL teams want to call it these days. You got to rebuild your team. and you have to reload your roster. And so the Saints will have to start with these contracts. Derek Carr, $51 million. You could restructure him and kick $30 million into the future, and then all of a sudden you've made $30 million. Or you can try not to touch his contract at all and try to make money elsewhere. The Saints are currently 50 to 60, let's call it, $1 million over the salary cap. I say 50 to 60 because, again, we don't know what the actual salary cap is yet. But Cam Jordan, he's going to be a guy you're going to have to go to and ask to take a pay cut probably, because his role over the course of the past 2 years and his role going into next year are not equal to the amount of money that he's being paid. He's due a $12.5 million base salary this year. That's got to come down. That's got to come down for the role that he's going to be asked to play. Taysom Hill, we don't even know if he's going to play again, but right now taking up over almost $18 million of dead cap. Sits with a $10 million base salary. His is a salary cap number that's going to have to be adjusted if you can even adjust it, because the timing of his injury means he's not going to be ready for the beginning of the season anyway. So what can you do with his contract before he's been medically cleared and all these other things? That I don't know. I don't know how much of his deal, if any, is guaranteed for injury. So that would be a big part of what that equation ends up factoring into. Demario Davis, I don't think there's a ton you do with him other than restructure him, honestly. You're not going to go to Demario Davis for a pay cut. He's playing his tail off. He's playing very well still. So I don't know that you can go to him and ask him for a pay cut unless you're asking him for like you did last year, for you do a pay cut and an extension, but then you're just going to end up being right back in the situation. And Tyrann Mathieu is another one that, I think you do approach for a pay cut. You're playing him out of position anyway. You're already asking him to do stuff that's not what he does. He's not a free safety. He's somebody that should be playing down near the line of scrimmage, making plays. That's why he's been asking for more robber calls and things like that, so he can prowl the middle of the field, because that's where his game is. This is where the Saints need the most help, and this is where the Saints need to get started when it comes to all their salary cap situation. I did see somebody say, well, just trade all of them. Well, that doesn't help at all. You can't. If you trade them, what happens is that all of the money that's already been restructured and that's been pushed into future years, because there's still money on the books for a lot of these guys going into 2026, 2027, 2028. What happens is at the moment that you trade them, that all that salary that's been prorated and kicked down the road, it all accelerates. And so in almost every single case, you end up losing money when you trade these players as opposed to saving any money. Trading them does not help. You have to go to them and start talking pay cuts. You're going to have to do some hard restructures. Now, you've got some young players that you can restructure, Cesar Ruiz, Eric McCoy, stuff like that. There's some other players where you can do that, where you don't have to touch maybe some of the bigger contracts like Derek Carr's contract if you don't want to, which could be wise. It allows you to just kind of like take the pill here in 2025 and then be ready to go a little bit better, in better condition in 2026. But until that actually happens, we don't really know. So, and Derek Carr has already said that he's not going to take a pay cut. Of course he's not going to take a pay cut. The team didn't win any games without him. Like Mickey Loomis said yesterday, or on Monday and everything, and everybody's so excited that, Derek Carr would have been a top 10 quarterback if he was on the field, but he wasn't on the field. But on top of all that, he's got all the leverage, right? The Saints didn't win a single game without him, a single one. And so you can't go to him and say you take a pay cut because, you're not playing up to your standard or whatever. He's paid like a middle of the road quarterback. He plays like a better than middle of the road quarterback, plays in the top 10 in a lot of these metrics. The team has now publicly acknowledged that he's a top 10 quarterback in some metrics. They're clearly not going to go to him for a pay cut. And if they did, they've already negotiated themselves out of any leverage that they could have had by acknowledging that he's a top 10 guy in some metrics. Right? You know what I mean? This is not opinion. It's more so just like, hey, this is what the team has done to itself than anything else. And so I'm really interested to see where the Saints go here. But they do have some other places to make money. Carl Granderson, you can restructure. Guys like Cesar Ruiz, Eric McCoy, you can restructure some of these younger contracts, things like that. There's players that you can cut and maybe make some money on as well. But as of right now, where the New Orleans Saints need to get started is these top 6 cap hits, really top 5 cap hits. Because the Ryan Ramczyk one is going to be what it is. There's nothing you can do there. But man, when it comes down to the amount of money, 46.5% of their potential 2025 salary cap already invested in these 5 age 32 or older players and or soon to be retired Ryan Ramczyk, shows you exactly where the New Orleans Saints need to get started with all their work when it comes to salary. And there's too much money invested in those situations. Coming up next, let's go ahead and take a look at the other major coaching staff opportunity for the New Orleans Saints, defensive coordinator. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs wants to help you find the quality candidates you want to talk to faster and for free, because growing your business in 2025 comes down to who you hire. And let's face it, better hires start with better insights. And that's where LinkedIn comes in, because they will give you the strongest hiring data available that you won't be able to get anywhere else. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself to find jobs, and I can tell you that it's an absolute game changer when you're trying to find the right fit as an employee. I can only imagine what it's like on the other side as a small business, especially with 72% of small businesses who use LinkedIn for their hiring that say that LinkedIn has helped them find high quality candidates, not just candidates, high quality candidates. So go and check them out today. Hire smarter this year and have your next great hire with LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints need a new head coach, yes, but behind that, and once that hire is made, the New Orleans Saints also have a major opportunity to help improve its defense with a new defensive coordinator. Back in week 9, when the New Orleans Saints fired Dennis Allen, which was the right choice, not only did they fire Dennis Allen, the head coach, but they also fired Dennis Allen, the defensive architect and defensive coordinator. And so this is another major opportunity for the New Orleans Saints to get their defense bolstered and improved, to get their team back on the right track. Remember, this is a team that had a long-running history of being a very good defensive team. Go back to 2017, and really you've watched the defense build since then. It was the defense that was the calling card of this team for a little while, and is one of the reasons why Dennis Allen ended up getting the head coaching opportunity in the first place. And we have watched that defense over the course of the last 3 years absolutely fall apart. And last year was its rock bottom, right? 31st in the NFL when it came to defending the run. They were, below middle of the NFL when it came to defending the pass. They were below the middle of the NFL when it came to a lot of the larger metrics when it came to delineating like what's a successful defense in the league. And so for the Saints, who plummeted big time over on the defensive side here in 2024, or before in 2024, now here in 2025, have the opportunity to be able to kind of help bolster themselves and help themselves out. They were 19th in the NFL in 2024 in scoring defense, 30th in total defense, 27th in passing yards, and 31st in rushing yards. They were a bad defense, and probably the worst that we've seen this defense perform since, dare I say, the 2014, 15, 16 era. I mean, we saw the number of broken plays on the backside. We saw the number of explosive plays surrendered, the number of explosive rushing plays surrendered, like multiple 60-plus yard rushing plays surrendered by this defense. Even when Dennis Allen was still in town, you remember back when Saquon Barkley broke one off for over 60 yards up against the New Orleans Saints. And then a tight end broke another one off for 1 yards that led to another Saquon Barkley touchdown late in a game that they had otherwise had in, I don't want to say in control, but they were in. They were certainly in. That has been the story of this New Orleans Saints defense as of late. And now there's a chance to change that. There's a chance to improve this defense. Now, it's not going to happen in 2025, but it will happen incrementally over the course of time. The Saints could go with former defensive coordinators. There are some available, guys like Lou Anarumo and others who I think kind of got the short end of the stick over in Cincinnati. I think they just simply don't have the talent on their defense because that franchise does not like to spend money over on that side of the football. They brought in Trey Hendrickson and they got the edge rusher, and he's continued to do great since leaving New Orleans. He was great. He was doing great when he was in New Orleans. Nothing's changed for Trey Hendrickson, but they didn't really pour a lot of money into other areas over on the defense after spending their time pouring money over in the offensive side. It's typically what happens with NFL franchises when you have particularly frugal NFL franchises like the Cincinnati Bengals. They eventually start spending money, but then they only start spending money on one side of the football. and then they don't spend money on the other side of the football. Then somebody finally realizes like, oh, both sides of the ball have to be good. And then things pick up from there. So brighter days ahead for Cincinnati Bengals fans. But for Lou Anarumo, he ends up hitting the market and is now available. Now, Dennis Allen is going to get another defensive coordinator job somewhere. He's already interviewed or been talked to by the Indianapolis Colts. We'll see where things go for him. He will not be back in New Orleans as a defensive coordinator. That used to be a very, very common thread where people would say, well, just demote him to defensive coordinator. Such a thing does not exist. It has never happened. It will never happen in the NFL that a player or that a coach gets moved down from head coach to a coordinator position and just goes, all right, this is fine. I like these digs. It'll never happen. But for the Saints, there are a lot of former DCs out there, and there are also going to be a lot of like defensive assistants out there that, you know, a head coaching candidate or head coaching hire rather might have access to and might want to bring along with them. Or you hire the head coach that revamps your defense. But interestingly enough, the Saints have only interviewed so far and have only requested interviews so far 2 of those types. Aaron Glenn, who's a defensive coordinator by trade, who would become a head coach and de facto DC. And then Anthony Weaver of the Minnesota Dolphins, the Miami Dolphins. Somebody showed me the Dolphins in Minnesota. Somebody showed me the Dolphins in Miami too, I guess. But that's stupid. There are Dolphins in Miami. Leave me alone. All right. Leave me alone. I don't know anything about Dolphins. All right. There, you got me. But the Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator, Anthony Weaver, would be somebody that probably would come in and do both as well, right? Be the de facto DC. So that's one way to handle it. You could hire a new DC, or you can bring in somebody that's a great defensive assistant on a really solid defense, and that puts the team, you know, gives the team a new leadership on the defensive side of the football, whatever it might be. The other person that I really, really like and would love to see hired in New Orleans, selfishly, as a defensive coordinator is Robert Saleh. But Robert Saleh's interview with the Jaguars sounds like it's gone so well. They're interviewing him for the Dallas Cowboys job too. You know, talking about a guy that got the short end of the stick in New York with the Jets. He definitely did. He got shafted in that situation where there was the Aaron Rodgers run New York Jets, and we got to stop allowing players to have this kind of power. But man, like Robert Saleh would be phenomenal as a defensive coordinator again in the league, but he's still a very good head coach and should get more looks at head coach first. If he hits the market though, that's where I think I'm sprinting if I'm the New Orleans Saints. But here's the thing too, beyond just who is in charge of the defense, what about the changes you'd like to see on defense, right? Things that are a little bit more concrete in terms of like, oh, sure, there could be a new leader. You know, you can promote Michael Hodges to defensive coordinator, but are you okay running Dennis Allen's system again? I don't think you are. And so I think that there are things that the New Orleans Saints should absolutely consider. You've heard me rant and rave already several times about the need for speed on their defensive front. And so that means more speed rushers, win with bin type guys that are more athletic than the quarterbacks that they're facing. I think that is something that you absolutely need to see. I wouldn't be surprised to see the New Orleans Saints also be interested in maybe a potential change to 3-4. You want to make sure you have the most athletic front possible. Having a 3-4 defense is a really, really good way to do that. Get those guys standing up so that they can get perimeter to perimeter, sideline to sideline. Make sure that your edge rushers are guys that are able to keep up and be able to make plays at the quarterback when they get there. All that 130 plus pressures combined by Chase Young and Carl Granderson, but only 10 sacks. Like that number has got to come up. Can you work with Carl Granderson and get him back down to where he was when he was in college? Maybe not as light as he was in college, but can you lighten him up after he spent so much time bulking up? You know, I've heard other players already talk about trying to slim down a little bit on the defensive line. So that could be a route that the Saints could go as well. I think figuring out new ways to utilize your linebackers and adding more athleticism to the second level, I think is a big one as well. And I think too, stop playing players out of position. We talked about, you know, we've said over and over again the loss that Zach Bond was, who's now a first team All-Pro because the Saints just didn't use him right. They just had it in their mind because they saw him take one snap during the Senior Bowl that he could be an off-ball linebacker, and they spent so much time investing in him in an off-ball linebacker that the 12 and a half sacks that got him drafted and made him a draftable player in the first place coming out of Wisconsin just kind of got erased from the ledger for years. And then they finally gave him the opportunity to start rushing the passer and playing on ball at the end of his time in New Orleans. And he rightfully said, no, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go somewhere that's going to utilize me. And then he ends up in Philly, and now he's a first-team All-Pro. Stop playing players out of position. Draft them to do the thing that they did that made them draftable, and then let them do that thing in the league. I don't think that that's too crazy to ask. And I don't think that that's something that is quintessential to the New Orleans Saints, more than I think that that was something that was about how Dennis Allen viewed his defense. A lot of rules. Everybody had to fit a box. All these other things. No more of that. Go and get somebody that's going to allow these players to play to their strength, just like we've seen the New Orleans Saints doing after Darren Rizzi took over, and then allowed the defense to start making the coordinator right. Now, they still struggled, don't get me wrong, didn't fix everything, but I do think that that is a viable path forward for this New Orleans Saints defense. So yeah, head coach, very important, don't get me wrong, but you got to get that defensive coordinator hire correct as well, if that's not automatically filled by that head coach. All right, y'all. That's going to do it for today. We appreciate you very much. We will see you tomorrow. Continue to keep you up to date with everything going on around this New Orleans Saints coaching search and more. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.